Sometimes the bonds we form can transcend species, time, and even the wildest odds. Imagine saving a tiny dying lion cub, and 18 years later that same lion recognizes you and comes back to say thank you. This is the story of Thomas Mitchell and Django, a bond so profound it challenges everything we thought we knew about animal memory and emotion. From a desperate rescue in the Kenyan savannah to an emotional reunion that brought a wildlife sanctuary to tears, this is a tale that will warm your heart and restore your faith in compassion. Before we dive into this incredible journey, make sure to like, follow, and comment below. Share your thoughts on what you would do if a wild lion remembered you after nearly 2 decades. The golden grasses of the Masai Mara stretched endlessly under the late afternoon sun, shimmering as if the land itself were aware of the extraordinary moment about to unfold. Thomas Mitchell's wheelchair rolled slowly along the familiar path, each turn revealing a landscape he had once known intimately, yet now felt strangely distant. The air carried the dry, earthy scent of the savanna, mixed with a faint aroma of acacia trees. Every step forward was a delicate balance between anticipation and disbelief. At 75, Thomas's body betrayed him. The stroke that had confined him to this wheelchair 3 years ago had stolen much of his mobility and speech. Yet it could not diminish the spark of hope that had guided him across continents to this sacred meeting. As his eyes adjusted to the horizon, Thomas saw a familiar silhouette in the distance. At first, it seemed just a massive lion resting on the sun-warmed grasses, his mane glowing in the golden light. But something in the lion's posture, the intensity of his gaze, froze Thomas in place. The massive creature, Django, the lion he had rescued 18 years earlier, lifted his head and stared directly at him. For a moment, the world held its breath. It was not just recognition, it was understanding, something deeper and almost human in its clarity. Thomas's hand trembled as it hovered over the armrest of his wheelchair. "My God," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion, slightly slurred from the stroke. "He remembers me." A tear slid down his weathered cheek as Django, a full-grown apex predator, now weighing nearly 480 pounds, rose slowly, deliberately, from the grass. Each movement was measured, calm, and unhurried. His amber eyes never left Thomas's face, and there was none of the usual caution or suspicion that marked wild lions encountering humans. It was as if the years had dissolved between them, leaving only the bond that forged in the crucible of life and survival. The small group of wildlife professionals accompanying Thomas held their collective breath. Ochieng, director of the Kenya Wildlife Service, kept a careful distance, ready to intervene if the lion exhibited any aggression. But there was no aggression. Instead, Django began walking toward Thomas with the gentle authority of a king approaching an old friend. His massive paws sank slightly into the soft earth with each step, the sound of his movement muted by the tall grasses. For the observers, it was a surreal sight, a dangerous predator demonstrating a level of trust and recognition rarely documented in wildlife studies. Thomas's mind flashed back to the first days of his life with Django. He remembered the cub's fragile body, the sickly weight of barely 8 pounds, the tiny, watery eyes that clung to life with stubborn determination. He remembered the nights spent sleeping beside the cub's enclosure, the endless feedings every 2 hours, the constant worry over whether he had done enough to save a life that seemed already slipping away. And now here was that same creature, fully grown and commanding, acknowledging him in the same way he had when he was a helpless infant. After all these years, "He actually remembers," Thomas murmured, placing a tentative hand on Django's thick mane as the lion drew close. Django lowered his head gently onto the armrest of the wheelchair, aligning his face with Thomas's trembling hands. The moment was intimate, private, and almost sacred. The lion's rumbling vocalizations, low and soothing, mirrored the sounds he had made as a cub seeking comfort. Observers whispered in disbelief, realizing they were witnessing something unprecedented. A wild adult lion exhibiting prolonged emotional recognition and attachment to a single human. Jennifer Mitchell, Thomas's daughter, had organized this reunion, and her eyes glistened with tears as she watched her father interact with the lion who had shaped not only his career but also his understanding of the natural world. "Dad talked about Django every single day since your stroke," she whispered to Dr. Ochieng. Even when he couldn't speak clearly, The only name he could say was Django. This was not just a reunion between a man and an animal. It was the culmination of years of longing, hope, and unfulfilled dreams, now fulfilled in the warm light of the African savanna. The observers were struck not only by the lion's recognition, but by the subtler aspects of his behavior. Dr. Patricia Williams, an animal behaviorist from Oxford University, noted the unusual submissive and affectionate postures Django displayed, behaviors normally reserved for lion cubs or mates, not dominant males in the wild. Every tilt of the head, every gentle brush of the mane, every low rumble seemed imbued with memory and gratitude. This was not instinct, this was emotional cognition, a connection that had persisted across nearly 2 decades. Time seemed suspended as Django remained beside the wheelchair for nearly an hour, nuzzling Thomas's hands and occasionally pressing his massive head against the armrest for comfort. He ignored the other humans present, focusing entirely on the man who had once risked everything to save him. The sight was deeply humbling. It illustrated that even in the harsh wilderness, where survival is the only constant, the bonds formed through trust and care can endure indefinitely. Thomas's voice, though broken by the effects of the stroke, conveyed the depth of his emotions. "Indeed, I know you can't understand my words, old friend," he said softly, stroking Django's mane. "But I hope you know that saving your life became the most important thing I ever did. Watching you thrive has given meaning to my entire career." Django responded with a gentle chirping sound, reminiscent of the cub he once was, seeking comfort from the man who had saved him. The sound was a soft echo of the past, a reminder that some bonds are timeless. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the Mara, something even more extraordinary occurred. 4 lionesses and 6 cubs approached cautiously, following Django's lead. Typically, wild lions are highly territorial, especially when confronted with humans. Yet these lions did not attack or show fear. They observed and eventually settled around Thomas's wheelchair, accepting his presence based on Django's unmistakable approval. Thomas looked around in awe, whispering, "He's introducing me to his family, treating me like a member of his pride." The scene challenged every previous understanding of lion social behavior and animal cognition. During the next hours, Thomas shared his life's journey with Django, the years after the cub's release, the stroke that had changed everything, the lost opportunities, and the lingering desire to reconnect with the lion he had raised. Django's attentive presence, the gentle rumble of his vocalizations, and the occasional nuzzle created a dialogue that transcended words. Here, 2 souls, human and animal, communicated through trust, recognition, and shared history. Perhaps the most remarkable moment came when Thomas began humming the lullaby he had sung to Django 18 years earlier during the cub's recovery. The lion responded immediately, pressing closer, chirping softly, and nuzzling in a display that reaffirmed the extraordinary nature of memory, emotion, and attachment in apex predators. Jennifer, recording the entire scene, whispered to the research team, "He remembers the song, the same one we sang during those sleepless nights." In that moment, the Mara's golden grasses bore witness to a miracle of empathy, dedication, and enduring love. By the time the sun set, casting its warm glow over the plains, the reunion had reached its emotional peak. Django slowly rose, walked a few steps away, then returned, licking Thomas's hand, a gesture of affection and memory that connected past and present. Every observer present felt the weight of this encounter, understanding that it was more than a reunion. It was proof that compassion, care, and unwavering commitment could transcend species and time itself. As Thomas's group prepared to leave, Django presented a final, extraordinary gesture. From the surrounding acacia trees, he carefully carried a small branch, the same species used in the cub's first enclosure, placing it beside the wheelchair. It was a gift, a memory, and a profound acknowledgement of the bond that had endured nearly 2 decades. The lion, now a wild apex predator, had not forgotten the man who had risked everything for him. For Thomas, this day marked not just a personal triumph, but a culmination of a life dedicated to wildlife conservation. The reunion had restored hope, healed emotional wounds left by his stroke, and demonstrated that true connections, formed through love, patience, and care, leave legacies that endure far beyond human lifetimes. As night descended over the Masai Mara, the golden grasses whispered in the wind, carrying the story of a man and a lion whose bond had defied time, species, and circumstance. In that moment, nothing else mattered. Only the enduring friendship between Thomas Mitchell and Django, a story of survival, gratitude, and unconditional trust, remained, a testament to the extraordinary potential of the human heart when extended to the natural world. In 2006, Thomas Mitchell was in the prime of his career. At 43, he had already dedicated nearly 2 decades to the conservation of Africa's most endangered species. His life was a blend of rigorous fieldwork, long nights under starlit skies, and tireless efforts to save creatures whose survival hung by the thinnest of threads. But even among the many challenges he faced, poaching crises, droughts, and the delicate balancing act of maintaining ecosystems, nothing had prepared him for the call that would redefine his understanding of both life and connection. It came one sweltering afternoon, carried by the urgent voice of a Maasai village elder. A lion cub had been found alone, fragile, and near death beside the body of its mother, killed by a rogue elephant during a territorial skirmish. The elder's voice trembled as he described the tiny, wounded creature, a life teetering on the edge. Many experts would have recommended euthanasia, considering the odds insurmountable, but Thomas felt a pull he could not ignore. There was a spark in the cub's eyes, fragile yet undeniable, that seemed to plead for a chance. He could not walk away. When Thomas arrived at the scene, the sight of the 6-week-old cub confirmed the urgency. It was barely 8 pounds, dehydrated, malnourished, and marked with infected wounds that spoke of suffering beyond comprehension. Its small body shivered, yet there was a stubborn flicker of vitality in its eyes, a determination to cling to life despite overwhelming odds. Thomas crouched beside the cub, assessing injuries and murmuring gentle words of reassurance. No veterinary facility in Kenya had the capacity to handle a case so delicate. The cub required intensive round-the-clock care. The only option was to bring it back to his remote research camp and attempt a rehabilitation that few had ever attempted successfully. The first days were grueling. Thomas's routine became a relentless cycle of feedings, medical care, and monitoring. Every 2 hours, day and night, he nourished the tiny cub with specially prepared formula, carefully massaging its frail body to stimulate circulation and aid digestion. Each syringe of liquid, each tender touch, was a small victory against death. He cleaned the cub's wounds with meticulous care, administered antibiotics, and observed every minute behavioral change, noting progress and setbacks in the detailed journals that would later serve as a chronicle of their shared struggle. Sleep became a secondary concern. Thomas took turns resting beside the cub's enclosure, ensuring that the young animal was never alone. Nights were punctuated by the soft cries of the cub, tiny whimpers that echoed through the empty savanna, and the quiet reassurances of a man who had chosen to bear the weight of responsibility for another life. The relationship that formed during those first months was unlike any Thomas had ever experienced. It was no longer just caretaker and animal. It was a bond resembling that of a parent and child, a fragile interdependence forged in adversity. Under Thomas's careful guidance, the cub began to respond. Its tiny limbs grew stronger, its eyes brighter, and its movements more confident. Thomas introduced gentle enrichment exercises to nurture instinctive behaviors while maintaining trust. Crawling across the soft grasses, leaping toward toys and simulated prey, the cub gradually learned the skills it would need to survive in the wild. Every progress milestone, each tentative step, every successful hunt simulation was celebrated quietly, with soft murmurs and a gentle hand on the mane. It was not just physical growth, it was the development of confidence, intelligence, and resilience. Django, as Thomas eventually named the cub, exhibited remarkable adaptability. Even as he grew stronger, he maintained a profound trust in Thomas, a trust that many hand-raised lions eventually lose either through over-domestication or misplaced aggression. His amber eyes followed Thomas wherever he moved, his small body pressing close during moments of uncertainty. Observers, including Dr. Sarah Walsh, Thomas's research partner, marveled at the depth of the connection. It was like watching a father raise his son, she recalled. I had never seen someone so dedicated, so wholly consumed by the responsibility of saving a wild animal. Months passed and Django's growth was exponential. By 18 months, he had transformed from a fragile, dying infant into a formidable young predator, fully capable of independent survival. Thomas had consulted with veterinary specialists, wildlife biologists, and conservationists worldwide, designing enrichment protocols that balanced the cub's natural instincts with the need for rehabilitation. Every lesson, every interaction was guided by the principle that Django must return to the wild as a capable, self-sufficient lion. When the day of release finally arrived, Thomas felt a mixture of pride and apprehension. Hand-raising a wild predator is a delicate balancing act. Too much human attachment could hinder survival. Too little intervention could spell failure. Django, however, approached the open plains with an astonishing blend of independence and recognition. He tested the waters cautiously, observed the environment, and began to assert himself as a young male with both confidence and restraint. Within months, he established his own territory, honed hunting skills, and earned his place among the dominant lions of the Mara. Even after Django disappeared into the expanse of the wild, Thomas remained an observer. Using telescopes, cameras, and tracking devices, he monitored the lion's development. He watched as Django grew into an apex predator, respected across 50 square miles, commanding a pride with authority tempered by the instincts honed under Thomas's guidance. Django's success became a benchmark for hand-raised predator rehabilitation, proving that with dedication, knowledge, and empathy, even the most vulnerable orphans could thrive independently. What made this achievement extraordinary was not only Django's survival, but the maintenance of a bond that defied expectations. Most rehabilitated lions either fail to retain trust for humans or become excessively aggressive. Django remained unique, carrying a memory of care and affection that persisted even as he matured. This subtle balance of wild instinct and trust in Thomas challenged established notions of animal cognition, memory, and emotional depth in apex predators. Thomas's own transformation mirrored Django's journey. The relentless commitment to saving the cub reshaped his understanding of empathy, patience, and the quiet power of connection. He learned to read subtle signals, to interpret behavior that might otherwise be overlooked, and to recognize that animals, like humans, carry emotional and cognitive legacies of their early experiences. Each night beside Django's enclosure, each gentle nuzzle or hesitant glance reinforced the idea that survival was not just a physical struggle, but a shared emotional journey. Through this intensive care, Thomas also forged a deeper understanding of the natural world's fragility and resilience. He witnessed how a single act of compassion, a decision to save a tiny dying cub, could ripple outward, influencing not only the cub's life, but potentially an entire ecosystem. Django's later role as a dominant lion in the Mara demonstrated the far-reaching consequences of these early interventions, showing that human dedication could coexist with, rather than dominate, natural processes. The months of rehabilitation, the long nights of vigilance, and the delicate dance of nurturing wild instincts created a foundation that would endure far beyond the savanna. When Django finally disappeared into the expanse of his territory, Thomas did not feel a sense of loss, but of fulfillment. He had given the cub the chance to live, to flourish, and to honor the wildness from which he had come. And in doing so, Thomas had discovered the profound truth that some bonds, once formed, endure across time, distance, and even species. By the end of that first year, the cub who had been abandoned and near death had grown into a symbol, not just of survival, but of the extraordinary outcomes possible when empathy, expertise, and unwavering dedication converge. Django became a living testament to the possibilities of conservation, challenging both scientific assumptions and the public imagination. Every sighting, every tracking update, and every pride interaction reaffirmed that the extraordinary care of one man had allowed a fragile life to grow into a dominant, thriving presence in the wild. For Thomas, these months were both the most exhausting and the most transformative period of his career. He had entered the Masai Mara to save a single cub, yet he emerged with a deeper understanding of the bonds between humans and animals, the emotional depth of creatures often underestimated, and the ripple effects of individual compassion on entire ecosystems. In saving Django, Thomas had not merely rehabilitated a lion, he had forged a connection that would define the rest of his life, a bond that would ultimately lead to the reunion that would astonish the world years later. 3 years ago, Thomas Mitchell's life had been irrevocably altered. A sudden stroke struck him while he was conducting field research in Botswana, leaving him partially paralyzed and confining him to a wheelchair. The stroke had robbed him of the physical freedom he once took for granted and left his speech slurred, making communication an exhausting endeavor. He could no longer navigate the rugged terrains of Africa, climb into jeeps for wildlife tracking, or administer hands-on care to the vulnerable animals he had devoted his life to saving. His identity as a wildlife veterinarian, which had been the center of his existence, now felt irreversibly fractured. The first months following the stroke were marked by frustration and despair. Daily tasks became monumental, and every attempt at independent movement reminded him of the stark limitations imposed by his condition. Even the simple act of holding a pen, once second nature, became a challenge. More than the physical struggle, the emotional weight pressed heavily on him. He had spent decades ensuring the survival of others, yet he now depended entirely on his family and caregivers for the most basic of needs. Among all these losses, there was one absence Thomas felt most keenly: Django. For 18 years, the lion had represented the culmination of his dedication, his expertise, and his compassion. Watching Django thrive from a vulnerable cub into a dominant male in the Mara had been the living proof of Thomas's work, his legacy etched in the wild itself. Yet now, with mobility and speech compromised, the thought of seeing Django again seemed impossible. It was a wound that medical rehabilitation could not heal, a yearning for connection, for closure, that had remained unmet. Thomas's daughter Jennifer understood this yearning intimately. She had watched her father's spirit dim as the years passed, noticing that despite the medical recovery, his emotional recovery lagged behind. One day she approached him with a plan that had taken months of quiet coordination: a return trip to Kenya, a chance for father and lion to meet again, defying the limits imposed by time, distance, and circumstance. Thomas's eyes welled with tears, a mixture of hope and disbelief, as he realized that a reunion with Django was no longer just a dream, it could become reality. The moment Thomas's wheelchair reached the Masai Mara, the air seemed charged with anticipation. Wildlife professionals had prepared for every possible scenario: tranquilizers on hand, vehicles ready for immediate intervention, and trained personnel monitoring from a safe distance. Despite these precautions, no one could predict the behavior of a wild adult lion who had not seen a human for nearly 2 decades. And yet, as Django emerged from the tall grasses, all concerns dissolved into awe. The lion, now fully grown with a bronze mane that radiated strength and authority, approached with an almost deliberate pace. His amber eyes locked onto Thomas, and with every step, the bond that had been forged during the cub's vulnerable months resurfaced, as though no time had passed at all. Observers could hardly believe what they were witnessing. This was not curiosity, nor a response to food or command. It was recognition, a conscious acknowledgement of a life-saving relationship from years ago. Thomas's trembling hands reached toward Django, who lowered his massive head onto the wheelchair's armrest. The gesture, simple yet profound, spoke volumes. It was the same motion the cub had made when seeking comfort, the same gesture that had marked the beginning of a bond built on trust and compassion. The lion's rumbling vocalizations were soft, almost contemplative, responding to the man's presence with gentle reverence. For the team watching from a distance, the sight was unprecedented. Patricia Williams, an animal behaviorist observing the interaction, noted that Django displayed behaviors normally reserved for offspring or mates: submissive postures, affectionate gestures, and complete focus on the human in front of him. In her 30 years of studying predators, she had never seen a wild lion demonstrate such clear and sustained recognition of a single human after a prolonged separation. It challenged existing scientific assumptions about predator memory, emotional attachment, and the depth of animal cognition. Time seemed suspended as Django remained close, pressing his massive head into Thomas's hands, nuzzling and producing low-frequency sounds that conveyed contentment. The lion ignored the presence of other humans entirely, focusing exclusively on the man who had given him a chance at life. Thomas spoke softly, recounting moments from their shared past, moments that Django could not understand in words, but seemed to feel in spirit. Each utterance, each stroke along the mane, was a reaffirmation of a bond that had survived the harsh realities of life, the passage of years, and the separation imposed by wild independence. Perhaps the most moving moment occurred when Thomas began humming a lullaby that had soothed Django during the cub's most vulnerable nights. The lion's reaction was immediate and unmistakable. He pressed closer, chirped softly, and nuzzled in a display of recognition that bridged nearly 2 decades. For Thomas, it was confirmation that care, patience, and empathy create connections that transcend species. For observers, it was a glimpse into the complex emotional and cognitive capacities of apex predators. As the afternoon progressed, something even more remarkable unfolded. Django's pride, 4 lionesses and 6 cubs of varying ages, approached cautiously. The adults maintained vigilance. The cubs displayed curiosity, yet there was no aggression, no territorial hostility. The pride seemed to defer to Django's judgment, accepting Thomas's presence entirely through the lion's influence. Witnessing this, Thomas whispered through tears, "He's introducing me to his family, treating me like a member of his social circle." It was a rare example of social learning and trust transmission within a wild lion population, influenced solely by one individual's emotional attachment. Over the next hours, Thomas shared the story of his life since Django's release, his career, the stroke, and the ongoing struggle of physical limitations. Though his words were occasionally fragmented, Django's response remained unwavering. Gentle nuzzles, soft rumbles, and attentive gazes that suggested comprehension beyond mere instinct. The lion seemed to understand that this was a man who had dedicated his life to the welfare of others, whose actions had directly enabled the survival and flourishing of the pride before him. The reunion reached its peak when Django offered small gestures of remembrance, pressing closer, sharing intimate vocalizations, and demonstrating behaviors he had only performed during cubhood. It was as though the lion was bridging the gap of years, acknowledging the care he had received, and communicating gratitude in the only language he could express. Thomas's daughter, recording the interaction, captured every detail, recognizing that this moment would resonate far beyond the savannah. Even as evening approached, the reunion was not complete. Django, with careful deliberation, picked up a small branch from the ground, an acacia branch reminiscent of the cub's first enclosure, and placed it beside Thomas's wheelchair. It was a gesture of remembrance, a gift from the world that transcended species and circumstance. This act confirmed that the lion not only retained emotional attachment, but also behavioral memory, a testament to the extraordinary cognitive capacities of apex predators. As darkness settled over the Mara, Thomas sat surrounded by a pride that had accepted him entirely through the bond forged by Django. Every gentle nuzzle, every soft chirp, and every deliberate movement reinforced the truth that care, compassion, and dedication create enduring connections. For Thomas, the reunion was more than a personal triumph. It was a confirmation that his life's work, despite physical limitations and the ravages of time, had produced results that resonated deeply in both human and animal worlds. This day, defined by resilience, recognition, and unspoken gratitude, symbolized the triumph of perseverance over adversity. Thomas had faced loss of mobility, of professional autonomy, and of hope, but the reunion with Django restored not only his emotional well-being but also his sense of purpose. In the gaze of the lion and the careful, affectionate gestures that defied scientific expectation, he found affirmation that his years of dedication, patience, and empathy had culminated in something enduring, something extraordinary. As night fell over the vast expanse of the Masai Mara, the golden grasses now dimmed in the soft glow of twilight, Thomas Mitchell reflected on the extraordinary reunion he had just experienced. The deep connection with Django, the lion he had nurtured from a fragile cub into a powerful apex predator, had been reaffirmed in ways that transcended science, logic, and expectation. Yet the story did not end with this reunion. In fact, this singular moment would catalyze a ripple effect, transforming wildlife conservation practices and leaving a legacy that would inspire generations. The morning after the reunion brought a moment that would soon make international headlines. Django, ever vigilant, returned to the campsite with a deliberate purpose. Carefully, he carried a small branch in his massive jaws, an acacia stick reminiscent of the one Thomas had used to construct the cub's first outdoor enclosure. The lion approached the wheelchair and placed the branch at Thomas's side, as though presenting a gift in acknowledgement of the man who had given him life. Thomas, overwhelmed, whispered, "He's bringing me a gift. He remembers." Observers noted that this act was far from instinctual. It reflected memory, emotional attachment, and a sophisticated understanding of symbolism rarely documented in wild apex predators. The pride, curious and alert, watched Django's actions attentively. The lion then performed an even more remarkable gesture. He picked up a dropped glove of Thomas's, carried it to each member of his pride, and allowed them to scent it thoroughly before returning it to its owner. By sharing Thomas's scent, Django ensured that his family would recognize and accept this human should he ever return. Thomas's eyes welled with tears. "He's giving me permanent acceptance into his social structure," he whispered, finally feeling the weight of the connection he had nurtured nearly 2 decades ago. Jennifer Mitchell, capturing the entire sequence on video, knew that this footage would touch hearts worldwide. Indeed, once shared online, it became one of the most viewed wildlife videos in internet history, resonating with millions who marveled at the intelligence, memory, and emotional depth of wild animals. Experts such as Dr. Jane Goodall praised the documentation, noting that it challenged preconceived notions about predator memory, emotional attachment, and social behavior. For many, the story of Thomas and Django became emblematic of the extraordinary potential of human-animal relationships when guided by compassion and care. The reunion also had a profound personal impact on Thomas. The stroke had left lingering emotional wounds, frustration, depression, and a sense of incompleteness. But reconnecting with Django provided a type of therapy that conventional medicine could not offer. His speech therapist later noted significant improvements in communication following the trip, and Jennifer observed a remarkable lift in his emotional state. For 3 years, Thomas had felt that his life's work had been prematurely truncated by his physical limitations. But through Django's gestures, he realized that the legacy of his efforts was alive and thriving in the wild, affirming the value of every hour, every sacrifice, and every ounce of dedication he had poured into conservation. Inspired by the reunion, the Kenya Wildlife Service reached out to Thomas with a proposal to establish a wildlife rehabilitation center dedicated to orphaned predators. The goal was clear: to apply the principles and techniques that had enabled Django's successful rehabilitation to hundreds of other vulnerable animals. Your work with Django proved that even the most fragile orphans can become conservation success stories, Dr. Ochieng explained during a video call. Thomas accepted the offer, becoming honorary director and lending his expertise remotely from Colorado. Through video conferences, detailed protocols, and mentorship, he continued to shape the next generation of wildlife veterinarians and conservationists. 2 years later, the Thomas Mitchell Wildlife Rehabilitation Center officially opened its doors. Django was present as a symbolic ambassador, a living reminder of the extraordinary outcomes possible when human expertise and empathy converge with natural instincts. At the entrance, a bronze statue commemorated Thomas and a young Django, forever immortalizing the bond that had inspired a movement. The center quickly gained recognition for successfully rehabilitating orphaned lions, leopards, and cheetahs, many of which went on to reintegrate into wild populations with the same level of resilience and adaptability that Django had demonstrated. The center's work extended beyond rehabilitation. It became a hub for research, education, and global awareness. Wildlife biologists, veterinarians, and conservationists from around the world visited, learning how careful, consistent human intervention could foster trust and skill development in young predators while maintaining their wild instincts. Every success story, from a rescued lion cub learning to hunt to a leopard establishing a new territory, served as a testament to the methods Thomas had pioneered. Each animal that thrived was a living embodiment of his legacy, a legacy built on patience, knowledge, and unwavering dedication to life. Even after his formal involvement became remote, Thomas remained deeply connected to Django and the center's work. Through camera feeds and research reports, he watched Django navigate the Mara, interacting with his pride and raising cubs. Each sighting brought immense joy, reassurance, and a sense of completion. It was a rare privilege to witness the fruits of one's labor unfold in a living, breathing testament to compassion, care, and expertise. In the years that followed, Django continued to thrive as a dominant lion, raising 12 cubs successfully and maintaining his territory with authority and wisdom. His behavior consistently reflected the lessons learned during his formative months, demonstrating how early experiences, trust, and human intervention could shape lifelong patterns without compromising wild instincts. When Django passed away peacefully at the age of 21, researchers discovered him resting beneath an acacia tree, the same species of tree from which he had brought Thomas the branch decades earlier. It was a poetic, almost ritualistic full circle, symbolizing the enduring bond between human and animal, past and present. Thomas's legacy extended far beyond Django. The center had saved over 300 orphan predators, each benefiting from the pioneering approach he had developed. Conservationists noted that these individual acts of care created ripple effects that transformed local wildlife management practices, improved public awareness, and inspired a generation of professionals committed to ethical, compassionate rehabilitation. His work became a blueprint for bridging the gap between human intervention and natural ecosystems, demonstrating that one life saved can alter the course of many others. As Thomas approached the final years of his life, his focus remained unwavering. Though physically weakened by age, he spent hours observing wildlife footage, analyzing behavior, and reflecting on the bond with Django that had defined so much of his career. The lion's thriving pride, his social structure, and his legacy in the Mara became a source of comfort and affirmation. Even in moments of quiet reflection, Thomas understood that the bond he had nurtured transcended the ordinary. It had inspired conservationists worldwide, influenced wildlife management protocols, and reshaped understanding of animal cognition and emotional depth. The story of Thomas and Django remains a timeless lesson in empathy, patience, and commitment. It proves that true care can overcome immense obstacles, that bonds forged through compassion can persist across decades, and that the connection between humans and animals can inspire actions that benefit entire ecosystems. In honoring this legacy, the Thomas Mitchell Wildlife Rehabilitation Center continues to serve as a beacon of hope, demonstrating that individual dedication can spark change on a global scale. Every rescued cub, every rehabilitated predator, and every successful reintroduction into the wild serves as a living reminder of the extraordinary outcomes possible when knowledge, passion, and perseverance converge. The legacy of Thomas Mitchell and Django is not merely a story of one man and one lion. It is a testament to what humanity can achieve when it chooses empathy over indifference, patience over haste, and commitment over surrender. And as the sun sets once more over the Mara, the golden grasses whisper in the wind, carrying the echoes of a bond that defied species, time, and circumstance. This story of love, care, and dedication lives on in the thriving wildlife, the young conservationists inspired by Thomas's example, and in the hearts of everyone who witnesses the extraordinary power of connection between humans and animals.